Hello everyone, this is IKG Productions here, and welcome back to Turnabout Podcast. In this case, it's episode 16. With me, I have another brand new guest. Please introduce yourself.
Hey guys, I'm Toatali. You may know me as the guy who posts the news on courtrecords.com or the Court Records Twitter, or maybe from my blog, Toatali Reviews.
There you go. As someone such as myself who's been constantly reading up on things and getting assets from court records over the years, it's nice to know someone who's been editing things for court records, so that's really cool. I've also been a big fan of your blog, especially things that I've seen, such as the Office piece that you did was really interesting, and I remember we talked a bit about that before. And I live for your Ace Attorney reviews. It's great because as someone such as myself who's very much familiar with reviewing in the video sense on YouTube, it's nice to get a different look and see written reviews and how those are handled, even of the same subject material. So, big fan of Toatali stuff. Very glad that you're on here to discuss an Ace Attorney topic.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, no, likewise. When was that? I mean, we have been on podcasts before. We've been on Storytellers podcast.
That's right.
Before,
we
right?
have.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fun.
Yeah. So with that said, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to make arguments for the best case in the Ace Attorney series. It's opinion-based, of course, but Toatali and I have each selected our own cases that we would like to give this sort of nomination to and explain why and have a discussion about. We did reveal what these were to each other before we started recording, but we haven't heard any of the explanations, so I think this is going to be really interesting. So with that said, Toatali, I'll have you begin, and you can give your nomination, any of the nominations that you had for best case in the series.
All right, well, I'll go for the one that, to start with, the one that I've played the most recently, which is The Golden Court from Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. I think this is a kind of cheat one. I was originally going to go for a case from Daigakuten Saiban, but I know you haven't played it, and I also know a lot of people haven't played it.
Yes, unfortunately we couldn't count that.
Yeah. But by the way, just in case anyone was wondering, that was Adventure of the Runaway Room. But the Golden Court, I think, is a worthy substitute. What I like about it isn't that it's not the quintessential Ace Attorney case, but it does some really fun things with the formula. I think it emphasizes the best out of any of the Professor Layton versus Ace Attorney cases, the sort of new things that game brought to the table, in terms of sort of increased emphasis on witness testimony and that sort of very unique atmosphere that game has.
Yes. You know, as someone who's been a big fan of the crossover with Layton ever since I first played it, I always found it interesting because here's how I would explain this. Most of the time, the last case in the Ace Attorney game that I'm playing is usually my favorite from that game. But when it comes to PL versus AA, even on my first playthrough, I always had a certain fondness for the Golden Court, that I felt that the Great Witch Trial just didn't quite land. I still really like that case, as bloated as it is at times, but I actually would give the edge to the Golden Court. And to sort of restate what you said, Toatali, I also think that this case best defines and utilizes those trademark aspects of the crossover.
Yeah, I mean, like, it does quite a few similar things to the Fire Witch, but it's just a sort of bigger, longer, better case than that. I also agree the final case has some quite contentious elements, let's say, like the big reveal at the end, which I think the Golden Court, happening in the middle of the game, manages to sidestep. And, it's got a lot of very memorable elements. It's got Maya's death at the end, of course, which is, amazingly shocking. I think the image of Professor Layton turned to gold is also it's quite memorable, and I also think it's in the Fire Witch you get a little bit of this with Kira, the villain, being slightly sympathetic in her, she's mental, she's got those sort of like crazy eyes and all that stuff, and you learn more about her afterwards, but there's something that she says about how she never wanted to be a witch and how that was never like something that she wanted, that's quite, makes you feel uneasy about the whole thing. And here they really play up on it with the butler, Grey Earl, who has an extremely sort of sympathetic and, kind of cruel backstory in terms of, discovering that she's a witch, then attempting to commit suicide, and then having to live this entire life pretending to be something that she's not, just because of the fact that the story has dictated that she be a witch. And I think it's kind of horrible, and it drives home this sort of cruel twist of fate at the center of Labyrinthia in a really interesting and well done way, I think.
It's so tragic, the plot points that you just described. And I think what makes an Ace Attorney case really strong to a lot of players, probably including ourselves, is how well things from the case, the unique aspects, like the smaller things like Jean Grail, investigation at the Alchemist House, unique aspects of the case, how well they complement the grander narrative at play, which is especially great to see that in the crossover, considering it largely is based upon the latent structure, where we're not so much doing individual cases, we're trying to tell an overall narrative with a lot of, passing back and forth between, what's the way I'm trying to explain it? Like, low times of ease and high times of excitement. And I think this case does a great job of being like the apex of all of the tragedy that occurs within PL versus AA story. And what it does is it shines a light on the storyteller. Like you said, the story dictating, well, with what the story dictates, it's what ended up leading to Grail's choices and how she was ultimately put into this terrible position, especially with what led to her father. That was due to selfishness of this whole plan that the storyteller had with him and how it went out of control. And these are all things that, again, interestingly, don't tie up here, because as you said, it's the middle of the game. It's the middle case, or one of the two middle cases. The whole wrap-up, that's saved for the Great Witch Trial. Yet there's something so interesting about seeing these things sort of turn now. Having the very end of the case be something as shocking as Maya's death, that's just begging for the story to continue. But we give credit to how PL versus AA in this case sort of gets all of that started.
Yeah. I think another thing that I'd like to, going back to that idea of how well it sort of exemplifies the themes of the game, I think, again, this is something also done by the Fire Witch, but done a little bit better here, is this sort of emphasis on witness testimony and the sort of fallibility of the fact that it's all these sort of, there's no science, no logic in this world, it's just people like squabbling over each other. So you've got obviously the fact that Amir is a key witness in both the first and the second, both of the sort of murders that are investigated in the Golden Court, and he's the sort of pinnacle of the unreliable witness, and really, really funny for it as well. I think you also get the cross-examination against the parrot, which, while in the first game, is a very fun moment and exemplifies how kind of silly the Ace Attorney series is. Here, the fact that the parrot is more reliable than any of the witnesses because it's an animal that isn't blinded by magic. I think that's a really sort of funny moment where they're using that callback to go further into the themes of Layton versus Wright. But also, what struck me on the replay is that there isn't a whole lot of evidence in the court record. When you go into the courtroom, you've only got one piece of evidence that you've gained from the investigation, and by the end, I think you only have 5 pieces of evidence, which for the third case in the game is, kind of
shockingly low.
Yeah, exactly. But it's because, they're introducing all these mechanics of like contradicting 2 pieces of evidence, or the sort of the hang-on, make it cross-checking statements between in testimonies, and because of that, so you don't need all the evidence, and so sorry, I've gone off track, but
It's fine.
what it means is that it all adds up to this atmosphere of not being able to really trust people, but those people being the only thing that you can rely on in the court, because you don't have a lot of evidence. You have to put all your faith in the hands of these very untrustworthy people. And I think, it's a game ostensibly set in the Middle Ages, and so it's a fun way of enforcing that idea.
I agree. I think this case truly shines a light on a lot of the strengths of the Ace Attorney series, as you said. It's such a fascinating case. There's so much going on. We could probably spend the whole hour just talking about the Golden Court, but with that said, shall we move on?
Yeah, go on to yours. Yeah, go on to one of yours.
Okay, one of the cases I nominated for this was Farewell, My Turnabout. A very popular choice, but I think it's well deserved. As someone who stated in my review of Justice for All that Farewell, My Turnabout was the best case up until that point in JFA, and I said that it would, like Turnabout Goodbyes and Rise from the Ashes, stand the test of time as we work our way all the way to the present day. They still seem like extremely strong cases amongst the rest of the series, which is impressive because we're looking at the earlier end of things. I still think that's the case. Farewell, My Turnabout, while it has some issues with pacing here and there, some things are a little too quick, some things are a little drawn out, while you could argue it didn't need to be as long as it was. There's many ways I think you could nitpick Farewell, My Turnabout fairly, but I think this case handles the drama of the Ace Attorney series especially well. I think it's the trademark feature of why I'm nominating it. The whole dynamic with the assassin and sort of putting limitations on these people who are working with the law. Phoenix Wright being the defense attorney, Miles Edgeworth being the prosecutor, Dick Gumshoe being the detective, and the entire police force that's involved are all strained at the hands of Shelley the Killer. And it just, you're worrying about Maya and the whole drama about, and as many have highlighted this, the whole drama about Phoenix Wright potentially having to defend someone who is truly evil. And what do you know? That turns out to be the case with Matt on Guard. I just think that this case manages to keep raising the stakes as well. So for as long as it is, and as detailed as it is, and as much as the player has to keep in mind about the evidence and the contradictions and getting ready for the trial, going through the investigations, they still keep raising the stakes. Sure, there's some downtime still, because any solid case needs to have some downtime, doing some investigating like in the hotel, and there is occasional comic relief with characters returning like Will Powers, but overall, things just ramp up, to the point where Francisca is getting shot by Shelley the Killer, and we didn't even see it happen, or busting through the courtroom at the end. All of these things lead to an extremely satisfying conclusion with taking down Matt on Guard in a way that really is a miracle that Phoenix was able to both save Maya and take down a villain.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. It is, to my mind as well, the sort of the quintessential like courtroom drama, high stakes, big thriller action of the Ace Attorney series, and I think it does that sort of almost perfectly. It's definitely one of the cases that I would have chosen if you hadn't. It's one of my favorite cases in the series for sure. I love the fact that the opening, where maybe on retrospect it's kind of a little bit obvious that Matt on Guard is actually the killer, but when you're playing it for the first time, there's so many things it does to sort of wrong foot you, like the first of all, the psych lock, obviously that's the big one, that he says that he didn't kill I've forgotten the name of the victim now.
Juan Corda.
Fine, yeah, he says he didn't kill him, and there's no psych lock. and there's a bit where Gumshoe, I think, says, like, the police have almost too much evidence, and that sort of makes you feel that maybe he didn't do it, maybe he was set up, you know. So there's all sorts of fun little things that are constantly wrong-footing you in a really clever way, and putting you on edge. And then, of course, yeah, you've got Maya being kidnapped, as you said, Francisca being shot off screen. You've got the return of Edgeworth, which is really fun.
Oh, yes.
You've got Adrian Andrews. I think she's a pretty interesting character.
Very significant for a minor character.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea of having to indict her for a crime that you sort of in the back of your mind know she didn't commit at first, and then later on definitely know she didn't commit. I think that's a nice little moral thing where you have to sort of weigh up in your mind at a certain point, like, do you choose between Andrews and Maya? Yeah, and then of course it has the biggest moment of character development for Phoenix within the series at that point, which is the sort of realizing that maybe the most important thing is the pursuit of truth, which is something Edgeworth has realized and is sort of relaying onto him. So yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's a great case. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also impressive to hammer in one more time how it was only the second Ace Attorney game that we got a case like this. I mean, again, I still have a lot of fondness and find a lot of qualities to Turnabout Goodbyes, and especially Rise from the Ashes, but even still, it just manages to really just trump those, in my opinion. Not everyone will agree with that, and that's totally fine, but it's one of those cases that just continues to blow me away every time I think about it. I don't know why, but it just does. And I love it for that.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair enough. It is a great case. You're right. And I think I would definitely see it as the sort of a case that emphasizes everything that's sort of dramatic about the Ace Attorney series, and really good how such a limited, these were games that were made for the Game Boy Advance, and so such limited sprites, such limited music, and yet it creates this amazing sense of a courtroom drama.
Absolutely. And with that said, I'm going to turn it back to you for your next case nomination.
Yeah, okay. So my next one is going to be Rise from the Ashes, which you mentioned before, obviously. I think if...
And this is where most people will click off the video.
I think if Rise from the Ashes... if Farewell My Turnabout is the sort of quintessential Ace Attorney thriller, then I think Rise from the Ashes is this huge, big, epic, with a capital E of a case. Obviously, it's really long, like really, really long.
Very long.
Huge cast, huge amount of evidence. But I think it uses the story and the space that it has to tell a story with real weight and some really interesting ideas. I think most of these come from the case's villain, Damon Gant. Gant? How are we pronouncing that?
I believe it's pronounced Damon Gant. Yeah.
Gant. Okay, fine. So, obviously, he's, a bad guy. But the sort of the backstory that surrounds him of him and Lana, forging evidence in order to convict this serial killer who we never meet in game, but we know that he's guilty.
Oh, yes.
And it creates this sort of interesting moral dilemma. And this is something that's then brought up later, of course, in Apollo Justice, when Phoenix basically does the same thing as Gant in terms of forging evidence in order to convict someone who is guilty. And what I like about Rise from the Ashes is it leaves it, like Apollo Justice, is it leaves it slightly open-ended. Like, you get your satisfying resolution, you get to take down Gant, who is this sort of pretty horrible guy, but at the same time it never properly condemns that specific action, which Lana is also caught up in. It doesn't give an easy answer to the fact of, is it okay for them to have forged the evidence to convict this serial killer? And I think that's quite this really interesting thing running through the background of this case. And of course, yeah, it's, a big, epic, multi-day case, but it has some real depth behind it.
It's almost like a commentary on the controversy that can happen in a police department and anywhere that really involves the law. And I think that's what helps make it the strong open-endedness happen. It's the fact that it's so complex that it's almost self-aware. Rise from the Ashes, it feels like it by the end. It's completely aware of how deep this has gone, how long it's gone, how many people have been involved in this, with the whole SL9 and the present trial, that it just sort of ends what it needs to and just lets you sit and think about the rest of it. And that's always a fun experience. It's part of why I love Apollo Justice and all of that sort of like abstract, like we're just going to make you think sort of kind of writing. It always really intrigues me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, this case and Apollo Justice are good at that.
Absolutely. When it comes to Rise from the Ashes, one of my favorite aspects of it, and honestly, while we only gave ourselves 3 nominations each, Rise from the Ashes really had a shot of getting into my nominations as well. So I'm really happy that you feel similarly about it. I think one of my favorite aspects of Rise from the Ashes is how well it illustrates the police agency that we've been associated with for so long. Just the Los Angeles Police Department is a central aspect of this case. It's a lot of the locations. It has a lot of the characters associated with them, such as Jake Marshall, Angel Starr, and even Detective Gumshoe is very prevalent. And I think that's interesting because if I was Shu Takumi and the developers of the Ace Attorney games, and I said, alright, we're going to re-release the first Ace Attorney game, but we're going to add a 5th case. It's going to be huge, complex, a nice big bonus, and it's going to take place after Goodbyes. If I was them, I would have done, ideally, the same thing. Pick a case that would have fleshed out the Ace Attorney world, because by that point, even though chronologically speaking this isn't true, Trials and Tribulations is already released, and it would have been nice if we, during the trilogy, got to see more of the police department. And that's exactly what you get in Rise from the Ashes, and it really runs with it. It really does. And again, kind of adding commentary to the whole controversy that can happen in law-based sections of work like this.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a nice way to look at it as something that fleshes out more of the world of Ace Attorney. And I like cases that do that. Yeah, actually, I mean, it's a very different end of the spectrum case. But one of the cases that I thought about picking was Turnabout Corner because,
oh really?
Even though it's, you couldn't be more far away from Rise from the Ashes in a lot of things, it also has that element of creating the sense of more of the world of Ace Attorney, because it all takes place around like a certain neighborhood, so you get more of a, I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, but hopefully you know what I'm getting at, but I thought that was quite an interesting point you made, that it was, yeah, delving deeper into a certain aspect of the world of Ace Attorney that you might not have seen in the rest of the trilogy.
Right, all the more justified in having the case be an add-on. I think I really, really appreciate its addition, even if it wasn't intended at the start. I know that a controversial aspect about Rise from the Ashes is its inception, but I actually really like that. I do. I love how it fleshes out the world, and I do see what you're getting at with Turnabout Corner. It does revisit that sort of idea. Now we take it to a more local neighborhood level, and it's interesting there too. But with that said, I guess, I should ask you, anything else you'd like to add to Rise from the Ashes?
I guess, well, I mean, we're supposed to be promoting these cases as our picks, right? So I shouldn't be criticizing it.
You can, if you want, though. I mean, no case is perfect, after all.
Yeah, I will say, I think some of the sort of gimmicks that it relies on with the DS touchpad are a little bit drawn out occasionally, and I don't particularly like Emma in this case, even though I like her a lot in Apollo Justice. I think she's not great here, she's a bit annoying, and I just wanted to highlight those things because, I thought if we're talking about these cases more generally, then that'd be a good idea to throw in some critiques as well. But
for sure.
Yeah, no, please move on to your next one.
Okay, well, I'm glad you mentioned Emma Skye, because I have a perfect transition.
Oh yeah.
The next case that I'm going to nominate for best case in the series is Turnabout Succession, and Emma is definitely a part of that. While she's not a big player for the overall plot of Turnabout Succession, she's not even that prevalent, but I also really am fond of how Emma was written in Apollo Justice, and I think that's only going to help Turnabout Succession. So Turnabout Succession is what I call a behemoth of a case, because while it's not necessarily feeling like it's as long as Rise from the Ashes, or has as many factors as, say, Turnabout Ablaze, I think it's so nuanced that I don't even know where to start. I mean, one of the big reasons I have decided not to start working on Ace Analyzation number 4 is because I want to do Turnabout Succession justice, and I'm just not ready to do it yet. But here's an attempt for this video, because we have to talk about it. I did nominate it. I think this case, it manages to connect the previous 3 cases within Apollo Justice in ways that you can't even tell while you're going through the game that it's going to matter. Because when you think about it, for example, I was just watching a video on the DCAU with Justice League Season 2, and a lot of the episodes tie back to things that happened within the same episode, but in ways that you expected it would go there. Because a lot of writing you see is logical. I mean, it should be. You start with an idea, and you're going to expand upon it. And while it's okay that this happens, the viewer usually knows it's coming. It's just the way things progress. Turnabout Succession manages to be so brilliant that it will connect things such as the paintings you saw in Case 1 were drew by one of the victims of Case 4 because he had a certain fondness for his mentor Phoenix Wright. Does that detail ultimately matter? No, not really. But it's an interesting idea. It's something that we haven't seen in the series before. Before I hand it off to you to give your thoughts on Turnabout Succession, another thing I want to mention to the viewers is I like the atmosphere of this case a lot. I think it has atmosphere, like such a nuanced atmosphere in ways that we haven't seen otherwise. I think that there's so much darkness to what's going on with the situation of the investigation, with the Mishems, or Mishems, or however you pronounce it. The return and lasting haunt of Christoph Gavin. The sort of crumbling of the legal system is progressing. Thanks to the ending speech of Case 3 with the judge, we really know something bad's coming. You know, you just see all these factors, and you have this one man, Apollo Justice, who all he wants to do is just be a lawyer and just do his job. He just wants to do the job. Now, he's caught on this grand plan from Phoenix Wright to try and fix things, and you are just sitting there watching this happen. I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have problems with Turnabout Succession, but
okay.
I completely agree about the case's atmosphere. I think it is unlike anything else in the series. I think that moment where you present the forged having to make Phoenix present that forged diary page is one of the best moments in the entire series. It has this amazing bit of dramatic irony to it. I think that segment is incredible, and I think the way it ripples out into the rest of the case is really good. And the way, yeah, sorry,
no, go ahead.
Go on. The way that, you know, that whole thing about Spark Brush will always feel like he's being watched by someone. There's this weird sense of melancholy and paranoia, and yeah, it's very good. Yeah, that will always stick with me about Turnabout Succession. Yeah. You know,
I think you mentioned how brilliant of a set piece the ending to Phoenix's flashback trial is, and I agree. You know, the viewer know what's coming, but the characters don't. And that makes it hard to watch. Hard to do, even. The fact that you do actually have to present that piece of evidence. Who really wanted to do that? I don't think a single player really was willing to do it, and that's the point. And it's also a good commentary on even the legal system within the game. It's, alright, this was 7 years ago, but look at what you had to do. You know, it's horrible. And in the best way possible from a writing standpoint. I also really like, when it comes to Turnabout Succession, I like how the Mason system is handled. I think the Mason system as a concept is pretty fascinating. I know the storyteller certainly agrees with how much he's really, taken that sort of look and aesthetic and made it into all of his own, which is really cool. I've also had this fondness for the Mason system. It's interesting that Phoenix Wright would decide to make this. He takes so much time to put it in, but he sort of mocks his adventure, turns it into a game, makes Apollo and the jurists play it. It's something you really can't come up with on your own. And I like how again, it's turned into a video game, very meta, but you take elements from the past and the present and interchange them, such as evidence, dialogue, breaking psych locks, you name it. And what it does is it not only accentuates the paranoia in the atmospheres of all of these, parts of the case and with all these characters, it makes the adventure even more bleak for the protagonist. Because I feel like while in Farewell My Turnabout, the stakes are getting raised, you're still getting somewhere. You're still having leads, you're still making progress. Turnabout Succession, I just think it holds no bars. You as the player are collecting information, but you're not satisfied. And I think that's the point. You're not really making any progress. You're just sitting here hearing the tragic story of how Valent lost everything from the Grimaris, watching firsthand how Phoenix got sparred, participating in mind games with Phoenix and Kristoff. You're just forced to watch this. See what happened to Trucy's father and how she just lost his dad because he left, because she did because he left. A lot of things happen, and I think what it ultimately leads to is a very emotional case.
Yeah, I also think about the Mason system. The way it works with the Cyclops is a really good example of how the two sort of slight elements of non-linearity in the Ace Attorney series, which otherwise is very linear, obviously, they work together really well. There's loads of moments where you have to go back into a different clip to get the evidence for a Cyclops in another clip. I think that's really fun. I'm just trying to think what else do I really like about Turnabout Succession. The poison stamp. I think that's a really clever murder mystery method.
Oh, for sure.
That's one of the ones that's definitely stuck with me the most out of the entire series. I think that's kind of genius. Even
the sight of a red or yellow envelope will make the player's skin crawl just because of what that stamp did.
I think, I might as well, I said I had a few problems with it, I might as well elaborate on that.
Sure, by all means.
I do think that it needs to be longer. I think the final segment with Kristoff is too short. Obviously, I guess the idea is Phoenix has done so much of the work for you and you just need to set the ball rolling. But it leads to, in my opinion, it leads to the stuff with Clavier having to face up to his brother. I think that goes by too quickly. I don't think that's paced very well. I actually think, that entire final confrontation just needed to have a little bit more substance to it. I think, I do agree with some people about Phoenix in his flashback trial. I disagree with the idea that he's in most of the game that he's different, but in that specific trial there is something that feels off about him a little bit.
I do agree that there is something off about Phoenix in that trial, but I thought it came from a good place. I thought it was actually a really good idea, because I think the bulk of the difference that Phoenix has in that scene, or in that flashback, is that he's more snarky and maybe even a little too confident in himself. almost like
Yeah.
Miles Edgeworth or like a young Mia Fey. I think it worked though, because after all of the cases he's won, whether he took down the chief of the police, or in the case of the most recent big case, at least the last case we knew he took, being Bridge to the Turnabout, I don't think I need to even state the amount of triumph that he has from winning that case and resolving problems that people from generations have had through a court case. I think he deserved to have such confidence that when he sees this hotshot, young guy aside from him who'd rather, play fake guitar than make a compelling case, he's gonna feel a little like, oh, I see, okay, look at you over here. Well, I've got the experience, and I'm gonna kick your butt. Of course, there's irony there, but I thought it was actually interesting. I thought it was deserved to see Phoenix be even a little too cocky, because from a writing standpoint, not only is it understandable because of how much he's achieved in the past, as I explained, but it also just makes that last moment where you present the evidence even worse, because he was actually confident this time.
Yeah, I do sort of agree. I think the case itself is a little bit sort of internally inconsistent, because at the beginning in the lobby he says like, oh, I've never been this nervous before in my life, and then afterwards he's a bit
Seems
more
like a bit of an oversight
cocky
there.
Yeah, I do sort of agree. He has been through a lot, obviously, but it is also it's a couple of months after Bridge to the Turnabout, and it's not as if that he hasn't done amazing stuff before then. I mean, as you say, he's taken down the chief of police, and he's dealt with one of the world's most famous assassins, and all of that. So, but yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's sort of it's not enough to make the case bad for me or anything. But I do think it sort of sticks in the craw a little bit, for me at least. But yeah, no, I do like Turnabout Succession. I think it's definitely a sort of worthy pick for the best case. Yeah, it's a very interesting case.
All right, and with that said, back to you.
This is my final one, isn't it?
That's right.
Right. Okay. This is maybe a little bit of a sort of unexpected pick, but my I guess this is my ultimate pitch for what I think is actually the best case, and that's Recipe for Turnabout.
Wow.
And the reason I say this is because, I was thinking about the question of, what is the best Ace Attorney case, and I was thinking about it as a sort of representative for Ace Attorney. What would you put forward? And a case like The Golden Court is something I really like because it plays with the Ace Attorney formula a little bit, and a case like Rise from the Ashes I think is great because it's this sort of big epic, here's what we can do. But the thing I really like about Recipe for Turnabout is I think it is the quintessential Ace Attorney case. I think it has, everything that you would need from in my mind anyway, for a perfect Ace Attorney case. You've got a lot of comedy, which is great. You have a really clever murder mystery with a good setup that unfolds itself in a number of unexpected ways. I think that's pretty great. And I think you've got a really strong cast of supporting characters that are only used for this one case. And I think it is the strongest cast of supporting characters in the series, because I think it manages to have a cast that is, on the surface, very funny and entertaining to be around. But beneath all that, I think it has an extremely interesting theme of the power and influence of money, which is something that you don't see in a lot of Ace Attorney. Most Ace Attorney ignores money, but this is a case that tackles it head on. And instead of just, using money as like the motive for the case, it's in absolutely every single part of every character in the case's lives, and that's why obviously it focuses a lot on Gumshoe. I mean, you've got Maggie as the defendant in the case, who is the girl that Gumshoe has a crush on, and then Gumshoe plays a really big role in the investigation and bursts in with the crucial evidence. And Gumshoe, of course, one of the big jokes about him is how poor he is. And so he fits perfectly into this story, which is all about money and its effect on people. And mainly it's about people who are downtrodden by a lack of money. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but this is a bit of a strange choice. I need to defend myself.
Keep going, it's fine.
You've got Jean Armstrong, the chef, who is in crippling debt. You've got Victor Kudo, who is the old man who has absolutely no money and no influence over people and is sort of ignored by the world because he's also in a trade which has been forgotten. The bad guy, obviously, is a loan shark, but he is himself indebted to a gangster sort of mob boss, and there's a nice little contrast in the case between Victor and Bruto, what's his surname, like Cadaverini or something, and they're both the sort of old men in the case, but one is poor and part of a dying profession and is sort of cast aside by every other character, and the other is this sort of very rich old man who controls the entire case from off screen. I think even the victim ties into the theme because they're someone who also has a lot of debt that they need to pay off, which is why they're ultimately killed. I just think it is an odd case to pick. I understand that, but I also think that it's a case that best emphasizes to me what I love about Ace Attorney. It's a solid murder mystery with a strong cast and a nice, subtle underlying theme that ties the whole case together really well. Anyway, yeah, it's my pitch.
I'm blown away. As someone who ultimately didn't find Recipe for Turnabout to be that fantastic, even after an analysis, with the Trials and Tribulations review long out, usually my opinions, and so far on games after I review them, they don't change very heavily. Same is true for the Ace Attorney reviews. I've done up through TNT. Recipe for Turnabout I thought was a good case with a lot of great things going for it. I thought character interactions were especially strong. I liked some of the ideas of its location. A lot of the side characters were very entertaining. But ultimately I felt that a lot of it was undercooked and the pacing was not so good. However, I never thought about how much money really played a role into this case. It's definitely plays as that interesting backbone idea that ties everyone together. Like you said, it's very interesting how Dick Gumshoe is very prevalent in this case, as he's not, wealthy at all. It's a long-running joke, as you said. Definitely an intentional idea, because we're dealing with a lot of money. Jean Armstrong, associated with the loan bank. We got the loan shark villain. Very well tied together. All thanks to something that I have to admit is really brilliant, a car accident. Because there's two things that come from a car accident. Injury and money.
Yeah.
And that being like the sort of reminiscence, tragedy of the case is a genius idea. I just happen to think it wasn't very well fleshed out from a writing standpoint. It was still a great idea. So while I personally disagree and I would never really consider Recipe for Turnabout to be any of the best Ace Attorney cases, I very much see where you're coming from, and I think your explanation is fantastic. I think it's definitely an interesting case in that it does sort of embody all of the strong ideas, or I should say, not strong ideas, but it embodies all of the strong ways that these cases are written to make you think about life outside of the game. Because Ace Attorney has attempted to do this before and since in many instances, making you consider things, and the easiest way I can explain that is every case has a lesson, right? Some sort of lesson to take away from. And I think Recipe for Turnabout's theme is probably one of the more interesting ones. So
Also,
I think it's a fascinating case for sure.
Also has some great music. I love Fiero Tigra's theme. I think it's great. I love
Absolute
Victor
classic.
Kudo's theme. You know,
Oh, that's my favorite
Yeah.
from the case.
and great music, great part of Ace Attorney. But yeah, so
And great locations. You know, you have the interesting French restaurant with terrible food. You know, you have the kitchen associated with that. That's a complete mess. And you have Vitamin Square, which is just such a weird place. Why would you make a playground out of fruit? I don't think the kids want to play on the fruit.
yeah, I know, I agree. But they're also, I mean, what I quite like about them is that they're all kind of like the Ace Attorney versions of quite down to earth locations. You know, it's not set in like space museum come actual aero base. You know, it's set in the park,
Right.
the local restaurant, a technology company. You know, that's maybe the most outlandish of the stuff. And
Right, that's the most outlandish it gets, and the other is a bank.
yeah,
Alone
and
Bank,
alone.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, these are all quite like down to earth places, given the sort of the Ace Attorney spin, which is another thing I like about it. But yeah, do you want to do your go on to your final one?
Sure, sounds good. My last choice is The Inherited Turnabout, Case 3 from Investigations 2. Now, this was a case where, again, it's like PL versus A for me, where it sort of breaks the trend of the first, or of the final case not being my favorite from that game. I really need to replay Investigations 2, because it's been too long, and I'm starting to lose out on some of the details. I'm starting to forget things, which means it's time to get back. That sort of recently happened to me with Investigations 1, and I replayed it when the mobile version came out, so I'm all good now. But Investigations 2 I do need to revisit. So let me say that it's possible that the Grand Turnabout can overtake the Inherited Turnabout. I just don't remember enough. So going off of my first playthrough, the Inherited Turnabout was a case that when I finished it, I said, yes, this is my new favorite. And it's remained that way since. Now, I think, speaking of atmosphere from Turnabout Succession, while there's a certainly different atmosphere to the Inherited Turnabout, it's also strong in that category. I think the Zodiac Art Gallery is such an interesting location. It's completely on the opposite spectrum of Recipe for Turnabout, which, as you explained, has very down-to-earth locations, but just with that Ace Attorney spin, that little spice added to it. This is a fancy schmancy art gallery that definitely doesn't exist, and has ships made of chocolate. Like, it's so out there, but because of Ace Attorney's interesting art style, it's such a joy to explore. And, you know, you would expect such a nice place where people are displaying their pieces and looking at each other's artwork, but it turns out to be one of the most sad cases in the whole series, and it has such a big impact thanks to its key players, such as Manfred von Karma and Gregory Edgeworth. Now, I think we have to give credit to Yamazaki here, because I'm sure it was a challenge to write a character that was so beloved, but not anything about him was known. That being Gregory Edgeworth. You know, you literally took a character that we long knew was dead, brought him back, and had to write them as they were. And I fell in love with Gregory's character, which I heavily associate with this case. I also think the young Ray Shields was brilliant. Seeing him in a different sort of place and time, and just how he was different when he was young and how he was similar and things like that. Which also very well connects to Miles and Ray in the present day. I also liked how this case had a time jump, whereas instead of making it some virtual game where we take everything that Phoenix collected and then making it some PowerPoint presentation like the Mason system, which is one way of doing it, interestingly, this is another way where the case just stays resolved. Miles and Ray step back into the gallery, go, remember all of these things, and then they have to finish the case. Which is interesting because things do change. People change. Well, unless you're Delicious Scones, of course. That being her gimmick. But things change. You know, and I think Case 3 of Investigations 2 really shows how powerful a grudge can be. When we look at Dane Gustavi as a villain, and all of the wrong things that happened with Isaac Dover and their arguments and how awful they were really shows how long grudges can stand, what that can kind of do to a person's psyche, and what actions they'll do with that. So for me, I guess it's a combined interesting atmosphere, interesting locale, memorable side characters, memorable main characters, constant just dread, and need I even mention, they're well liked for a reason. Catherine Hall and Jeff Masters is just a couple of characters that I just love so much.
Okay. Yeah. So I really don't like this case.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of reasons for it, but I'll start with the things that I do like about it.
Sure.
For one thing, I do like Jeff Master a lot, and I think that the whole idea of, I love seeing his sprite age. I like this tiny little details about him sort of almost being tortured into making a confession, and then learning about the sort of reasons why he might have done that. I think he shows the sort of the very human effect of a poor prosecution and of Manfred von Karma's actions in a really good way. They don't tell you about, they show you exactly what's happened to him. I think that's really great. I like the time skipping stuff. I think it's an interesting idea. I like Gregory Edgeworth. I don't think Gregory gets enough as a character. I mean, I think I like him, but I don't think there's quite enough there, because there's not enough time you spend with him. I mean, you get the least amount of time with him, more than out of all of the playable attorneys in the entire series, I think. And it's impressive then that he makes any sort of impression, and that I do like him, but there's not a lot to go on with him, I don't think. Yeah, and what else do I like about it? Yeah, I think the bits of the murder mystery are quite good. Yeah. The setting. I mean, I'm not. I did mention, I went into this in more detail in my review, but I think while I agree that the actual setting, the art gallery itself, is a interesting place to explore, as is the Sweet Show in the past. The setting of the contest, where he's one of the contestants in the contest that he's judging, and when he must have advertised the contest, only a few people knew that it was for drugs, so he is advertising a contest where the winner is the winner gets one of his recipes, but he is also competing and he is judging, which I just think is absolutely bizarre. And I think it's even more bizarre that he has these recipes here for potentially very important drugs. I mean, even the least important one, which is for the taste disorder that he develops, that's still an important thing that he's just not releasing to the public, because he would rather have someone make him a nice tasty sweet and give it to them, and if they don't decide to sell it, I mean, then it's just lying there, doing nothing, of no help to anyone. I think that's really weird and bizarre, and maybe echoes real life pharmaceuticals, screwing over the little guy, but in a very odd way.
Yeah.
Especially seeing as we're supposed to like Jeff Master. And yeah, so I think that's odd. It doesn't bother me too much. Like when I'm playing the case, I didn't notice it. It was only when I was I got a little bit confused, and so I sort of stopped to make a note of like everything that was happening, and I was just like, oh, this is really weird. This is a really weird setup for the case that I just hadn't really noticed while I was playing. But it's just, I don't know. I think to me at least, it shows a sort of a bending of the. They were sort of thinking about how to make it work, but without planning it out, naturally. So it feels quite unnatural when you look back at it from a sort of not while you're playing the game, but from a different standpoint, and you just lay it all out, and you're like, this is a very odd, kind of forced, contrived setup for a case. And the other thing I don't like about it is a problem that I have with all of Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which is that I think the character writing is pretty terrible. And I think this less so about the final two cases, which is probably why I would put Grand Turnabout and Forgotten Turnabout above it in my rankings, because I think those cases, they do try and delve more into the characters, particularly Justine and Sebastian, whereas here, and in The Imprisoned Turnabout, I think the way they're written is really bad. It's just this sort of repetitive stream of catchphrases, and you get there's a bit with where Larry comes in, and I made a note of this in my thing, which is that Larry has always been a sort of one-note character, and when he's there interacting with Justine and Sebastian, and it's just this sort of like this cycling repetitive, stream of like one person going like, oh, I'm the best, and this is the best logic, another person saying like, oh, Justine, I love you, you're so cute, and then the next person saying, oh, I'll strike you down with the goddess of law, and it's just like, I found it just infuriating, and I think the same
this
thing
is
happens.
why I really need to replay Investigations 2, though.
Yeah, I mean,
it's, because I remember details, I remember my memories, of course. I remember the fun time I had playing the game and how I thought it was one of the best when I played it. The problem is, I don't remember, the writing, and that's why I need to go back.
Yeah,
I could end up still disagreeing with you, of course. From what I remember, I do, but I certainly welcome the perspective. I saw your, with your tweet that you released your Investigations 2 review, which I was very happy to see. I haven't actually gotten around to reading it yet, though, so I definitely need to do that once this podcast's over.
No, I think it's... I mean, I think it's a fun case. It's an enjoyable case to play, much more so than The Imprisoned Turnabout, which So when I replayed it recently, I was dreading going back to The Imprisoned Turnabout, but I was looking forward to going back to The Inherited Turnabout, because as you say, I remember it being fun. But yeah, on the replay, I had a better time with it than I did Imprisoned. It's I think it's quite well paced. I think it's quite pacey. It goes by quite fast. And so I think that's a good thing. I think there are lots and lots of twists in it, which is always fun. I think the one thing I will say about Yamazaki is that he can write a sort of great twist, and he just, they keep getting piled on in this case, and it makes it a very enjoyable experience. But I couldn't call it my favourite because I just have a lot of problems with it. Yeah, so sorry about that, but yeah.
No need to apologize. It's perfectly fine. Well, that's interesting. I think it's I guess we're kind of coming to a close here. Well, I just want to say, I think this is fascinating because we on our own, we chose our cases, and we are so in sync on the Golden Court.
Yeah.
We are quite in sync on Rise from the Ashes and Reunion and Turnabout. Or I'm sorry, Farewell My Turnabout. We're pretty much on the same page there. And then you get to our absolute favorite nominations of The Inherited Turnabout and Recipe for Turnabout, and we're just like, no.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that's interesting how this kind of worked out like that. That's just...
Yeah, we sort of got completely out of sync towards the end.
Yeah. But that's okay. I really enjoyed hearing your explanations.
No, yeah, likewise, yeah.
All right, well... with that said, is there anything on the cases that we discussed that you would like to wrap up, Toatali?
I think, well, just one thing that I think is quite interesting is that neither of us mentioned Bridge to the Turnabout, which I think will be a lot of people, what they're expecting to see here.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what a lot of people think is the best case in the series.
A lot of people do, and I'm sure they will be surprised. I think, I guess, to really sum up my analysis of that case and my review of Trials and Tribulations, is I see Bridge to the Turnabout as like you do Succession. I really like it in a lot of aspects, but I also have some issues with it.
Yeah, no, same. I mean, obviously, because I didn't pick it either. I think it's a really good case, but it's I wouldn't consider it the best case in the series. I just thought it was interesting, worth pointing out, because I'm sure a lot of people think that would be both of our number one picks, but.
Yeah, and I don't know how popular it is, but I've definitely seen quite a lot of support for Turnabout Revolution as well.
Yeah,
I also wouldn't nominate it.
I like Turnabout
Revolution. I like it. Yeah, like I like it, but I wouldn't put it this high.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that was very enjoyable. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I'm glad you enjoyed as much as I did. So, Toatali, where can they find you and your work?
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at it's TWO. Wait, I've got to check this because I recently got my account suspended from Twitter, so I had to create a new one.
Oh no.
So while I look up what my new handle is, you can follow Court Records on Twitter at courtrecords_. You can check out my website, which is toatalireviews.com. That's TOATALI reviews.com. My Twitter is TWOATALI. Not sure why I chose that. That's a bit confusing. Yeah, you can check out courtrecords.net. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the places that I'm around.
All right, I'll have a link to all that in the description, so make sure to check that out.
Cool.
All right, well, with that said, this was Toatali. I'm IKG Productions, and I'll see you in the next episode of Turnabout Podcast. Take care.